Pastor, we're just, quote, incompatible. That was their reason. We're just incompatible. Friends, there's no such thing as incompatibility.
Actually, there is.
It's a term made up by
We're
divorce
going to break this whole thing down, but we'll listen to it first.
Justify divorce. Here are the two words you need to hear that will make your marriage a success. Grow up!
Dr. Glen.
Yes, sir.
There's a topic I very much want to discuss, debate, all of it. I want to break it down. The idea that the number one cause for divorce is immaturity or the lack of effort going into the relationship.
I partially agree in the sense of that.
How dare you?
I know, man. But immaturity, I do feel like a lot of times people are immature. And what I mean by immaturity is you're not doing your due diligence to take ownership for the things that you do in a relationship.
Okay. But like, see, that's one of my exact issues is just how vague this is. Like immaturity. See, when you say immature, I think of someone who's young. I think of an adolescent, someone who doesn't think, through their thoughts in a mature manner. And yes, you could say ownership is one of those, but ownership is much more direct. Like ownership, sure, somebody that doesn't take ownership is probably lacking in maturity, but that's not if ownership is the issue, just say ownership, not immaturity.
Yeah, I think they're interchangeable, right? I mean, ownership is a sign of maturity.
Well, I guess that's what we're getting into, because I would say they're not interchangeable, and that immaturity in and of itself is not. Well, my whole issue with this is it's super vague. Effort is not the number one reason. Neither is immaturity the number one reason that people are getting divorced. I mean, you can say that it's a factor, but to go so deep as to say
it's number one. I agree with you there. It's not the number one factor. I would say that it plays a big part though.
Well, and I guess the overall problem that I want to discuss is something that, growing up within Mormonism, within a Christian upbringing, there's a lot of aspects that I very much appreciated about that education, in the sense of, like, I stopped practicing, I think this is like 7 years ago now, when I was 35, right? There was a lot of aspects of that I appreciated, but a lot of aspects that I didn't. What I appreciated was there was generally a sense of serving one another, and it was, discussed quite a bit that there's supposed to be a certain level of, I say equality, but it's like equality within a system that was kind of still very patriarchal in general. But that both people were responsible, and then to love and to serve and to, be Christ-like and all. I think that aspect was very positive. But one thing that got constantly shared, and it's like as if it's something that is so easy to buy into, is the idea that most divorces occur, that marriages fail, partnerships fail because of effort. That's patently false. And the other idea that the marriages fail because of immaturity. And so we have a video that we're going to play because it kind of summarizes this conversation in how it's shared. I found this shared so often though from the pulpit, and I don't understand why.
I mean, so you bring up another point then. So you're saying like immaturity in relation to honoring a religious belief about what a marriage should be, and then people trying to live up and honor that, and then being called immature. I agree with you there. If they're saying like this is the end goal and you're just not doing enough, or you're not honoring what God is telling you to do, or this is how it should be done, and therefore grow up and you're just not trying hard enough. I agree with you. Well, in that lens,
I don't exactly know what lens they're speaking from. Part of my issue with it is that it's just so vague and generic, right? Part of the issue is because it is just patently false. But why don't we go ahead and play and a sample of, and we're just picking one. This is from a pastor, Rick Warren from Saddleback Church. We'll play kind of the argument of what he's saying, because it's kind of the same thing that's being repeated.
The number one reason people gave for divorcing was this: Pastor, we're just, quote, incompatible. That was their reason. We're just incompatible. Friends, there's no such thing as incompatibility.
Actually, there is.
It's a term made up by
divorce attorneys.
We're going to break
this whole thing down, but we'll listen to it first.
Justify divorce. We're all incompatible because we're all different. Nobody's going to be completely compatible with you because nobody's exactly like you. So no matter who you're with and who you married, you're going to be incompatible. The truth is, you can get along with anybody that you choose to get along with, and you can choose to love anybody that you choose to love.
Kind of.
Now, if I were to summarize thousands of hours of marriage counseling in 2 words, this is going to save you a lot of money. Here are the 2 words you need to hear that will make your marriage a success. Grow up! Stop being an irritating little immature, I won't say the word.
Why not, Pastor?
It's immaturity that causes marriage to die. It's not incompatibility, it's inflexibility. I want what I want, and I want it now, and you want what you want, and neither of us are old enough, mature enough, smart enough, spiritual enough to change. And I am willing to let this thing die, then change. And you're willing to let this thing die, then change. It has nothing to do with incompatibility.
Okay. That's kind of the gist of it. You know, every person that kind of stands up on a pulpit has their own spin on it. But the general gist is that it's effort, it's inflexibility, it's immaturity that is the reason for divorce.
Okay, so but this gives a context because this is a pastor and it's a Christian church, right? So if you give it within that context and lens, being a grown-up is praying to God and honoring God, living Christian values, and then it's honoring the man and the woman and the roles that need to be played. That would be the definition of growing up based on, I think, what he's trying to say.
Okay. So why don't we go back through now and kind of break down each of the different issues that I have with this. And we're going to rewind all the way back to basically the opening where he's pulling his information from, I find highly problematic. So at the beginning.
You know, when I used to do marriage counseling, and I couldn't count the number of marriages I helped
and destroyed.
Tried to help. The number one reason people gave for divorcing was this: Pastor, we're just, quote, incompatible. That was their reason. We're just incompatible.
Okay. Based on this, so he says the number one reason, and this stuff terrifies me, dude. It terrifies me that this guy is a marriage counselor and he gives, you know, relationship advice, because I've been to people like him and I've seen how much damage they do and how much they did personally in my own relationship, because they look at everything through a highly simplistic lens. They don't have enough understanding of what's going on. And this is kind of the first point that I would make here is like, he's about to quote like irreconcilable differences. The number one reason that we get divorced is incompatibility.
That's what's checked off most when you fill out the application.
Yeah, he mentions in just a moment that it's on the divorce form, right? He says that this is a term that lawyers made up. Okay, fine. It's a term that lawyers made up, but it's also one of very few checkboxes on a divorce form. It's not the actual reason for divorce.
It's just the most convenient one to choose.
It's just the convenient one that you choose because you're not going to go into it. The courts don't give a shit. Nobody cares about like why you are getting divorced, right? So you just put that as a box. But to use that as reference, that this is the number one reason people are getting divorced, shows me just how ill-equipped he is from an intellectual standpoint, from a counseling standpoint, from everything, because he's giving advice from that lens.
Yeah, once again, it's very simplistic and it's not really backed by anything.
No.
Other than just based on what he's observing, saying that I see this in the forms, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, there are no academic studies. There's no evidence-based practice studies. Nobody talks about, oh, the number one reason that people get divorced is irreconcilable differences. No, you're pulling data from a legal form and saying that this is the reason that people are getting divorced. And that tells me this is just dumb. Like, but you're delivering it with so much conviction and confidence that people are buying it.
And that's the thing that, you know, we've talked about so many times. Like, that's what scares me when I watch people, when they have a very closed-minded view and they're so passionate about it and they see nothing else. That to me is a sign of ignorance. Yeah.
So that's the first gigantic red flag that I have in hearing this. And the other piece of this is, you know, I think one of the reasons why this idea of incompatibility, or like what he says is immaturity and not enough effort, right? The reason that sounds so appealing is because it's such a simplistic solution to a very complex problem. And so we go, oh man, well, if all I got to do is just put in more effort and just be more mature, I can do that.
Yeah, it gives you a little bit of motivation, like, okay, but then once you're actually back in the relationship again, okay, now what?
Yeah.
Right? There's no guidance, so there's no tools. It's just a temporary, like, okay, and then you're still lost.
Well, and it lets you feel like you have a little bit of control over this thing, when in reality, this isn't what's happening at all. Dumping more effort into this, or just, I'm going to be less immature. It's not a solution. Okay, let's keep going to the next line.
Friends, there's no such thing as incompatibility.
Okay, stop. Actually, there is such a thing as incompatibility. You can have fundamentally differing core values. This is the entire focus of our research, of the work that we do. This is incompatibility. Now, can two people work through it? Absolutely. But you can't take two people that have opposing core values, just set them down and be like, there's no such thing as incompatibility. No, there actually is. If you value, God and spirituality and religion, and I value wealth and power, those are opposing core values.
And we're not going to be compatible.
Unless we specifically work to understand each other's perspectives, unless we do very deliberate efforts in terms of like understanding where both of us are coming from. But that is fundamentally misaligned.
No, I agree. And then his audience, because he's speaking at a church, the assumption is that everyone has the same values because you're all there.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily true, right? Like you just said, maybe someone's looking for someone rich to marry, and they're looking within that community. That would be their core value.
Yes.
God and spirituality, because I really believe in what's taking place. You put us together. On the outside, it looks like we have aligned values, but we really don't.
Yeah. And that's like one of the biggest, that's one of my biggest issues with dating within religion. It's not that it's a bad thing. It's that you're looking at the wrong stuff. So let's again go back to this and say that we both meet at church, right? And let's give maybe an example of like, well, wealth and power, like, there's not that many people that maybe have that as a value. But so let's do a different core value. What if I value safety and security and you value curiosity and adventure? Mm-hmm. Those are the top of our core values, right? Yeah. And what the values that we're speaking of, by the way, it comes from a research list of 20 different core values that we use within our program. So there's 20 different core values that kind of dictate, the vast majority of human behavior. But what primarily kind of drives me is this need to feel safe and to feel secure. And what primarily drives you is a sense of curiosity, of exploration, of adventure, and kind of always seeking the new, right? We're both Christian. We both met at church, but these are fundamentally different values. And they're at odds with one another because it's very difficult to go out and seek adventure and curiosity and learning new things while also being safe and secure.
It's going to be really hard, right? Because you'll probably be the person that's like, we need to stay home. We need to raise the kids. Everything's got to be routine. And I'm like, hey, I want to go out into the community. I want to go visit this third world country and be of service.
Yeah.
Why aren't you coming with me? There's always going to be conflict because we're not aligned.
Yes. So the idea that incompatibility is not a thing, again, patently false. You can indeed be incompatible from a sense of value standpoint. And once again, can we work through that? Absolutely. If two people have the right, they need to have the right understanding, the right knowledge, the right tools to be able to deal with this. It's not just about dumping in effort.
Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't just quit just because it's not working. You should put the effort in, the time. But however, if you're not compatible, that's a huge issue.
Yeah. It's one that needs to actually be addressed.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then he goes on.
It's a term made up by divorce attorneys to justify divorce.
No, dumbass. Divorce attorneys did not make this up to justify divorce. Maybe they made it up as a reason not to justify. It's just to simply put down on a form. It has nothing to do with justification of anything. It has to do with simplifying the process of basically legally separating.
And that's different from research showing the reasons for divorce.
Yes, research that shows the reason. And this is like, oh my gosh, this guy's a counselor? How many... I don't understand how he could even come at this from this standpoint of saying that he's a professional counselor.
Yeah, I mean, once again, it's attractive in the sense of you get a quick answer, but then once again, now what after you start, okay, fine, I'll grow, I'll be more mature. but then there's no steps or there's no guidance to getting you there.
Correct. Okay.
We're all incompatible because we're all different.
Okay, there's some
Nobody's
truth here.
going to be completely compatible with you because nobody's exactly like you. So no matter who you're with and who you married, you're going to be incompatible.
Okay. This is what makes things like this, I feel like, go viral. It's what gives these, like this particular video actually went pretty viral, is that oftentimes within these messages are some truths. There's some things there that like are meaningful. Part of what he's saying here is kind of meaningful. Nobody is going to be exactly like you, right?
Agreed. You're never going to find someone that thinks the exact same way you do.
Correct. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible to find someone who is compatible with you, who shares similar values. That is entirely possible.
Absolutely.
So no matter who you marry, now there is some other truths to this too that we should talk about. Like, for example, the research from Gottman Institute.
Yeah. I mean, Gottman basically says that any partner that you're with, even if you divorce or separate and have a new partner, you inherit 69% of their problems.
Yes.
So we all have issues. We all have issues and you inherit them. But that doesn't mean, like you can't be compatible. You have to still find someone that you're compatible with.
Well, and there's another study too. And this is what's interesting is I'm very curious from the Gottman Institute perspective if they actually combine that understanding with Feeney's understanding, because Feeney did studies that basically showed where 80% of the relationships that we choose are going to be based on essentially past attachment wounds.
But this is, so once again, when you look at the two statistics, it shows the approach that you're going to take. So for example, from the Gottman side, communication, don't really change much. You get what you get. And so just kind of keep it on this kind of simplistic surface level and the relationship can kind of work itself out. Versus if you take Feeney, you're basically saying, look, that means that both of us have to do work on ourselves, support each other in that process and be accountable for the wounds that we bring, as well as working on the relationship itself. That's a more like in an emotional space, it's more total in terms of how you're going to approach it.
For those that aren't familiar with these names, let's go ahead and give a bit of context. So the Gottman Institute is a research institute started by the Gottmans. They're a couple, they're doctors of psychology, and basically they have a large body of evidence-based research around relationship psychology. You want to talk about Feeney and his background?
Yeah, so Feeney's a researcher who studies relationships. And, one of his biggest research is finding out the number one cause for divorces in marriages.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying about looking at like both these is when you combine the two of them, right, there is truth to the fact that you're very likely to marry somebody who has a similar set of issues as you, right? And so when he says like, it doesn't matter who you marry, there's a little bit of truth to that, because most of us are going to marry based off these past attachment wounds and traumas and things. And on top of that, we're going to inherit the issues of the other person. And I guess what I'm saying in combining those two is like, look, if Feeney has showed that basically we all have an 80% chance of just kind of choosing based on attachment wounds, then it's very likely that your partner's issues are already your issues. So when you look at Gottman's of like 69%, you're going to take on, you are going to take on some of their issues, but how many of those issues were just there to begin with? Yeah,
so it goes counter to his argument that you're incompatible. It's actually, the research shows that you have complementary wounds that make you compatible.
Yeah, I guess from that standpoint.
That you have to, each of you need to work on and actually make the relationship work itself. So that would go against what he's saying.
Yeah, that would for sure go against it. I think, if we were to interpret what he means by that is like, we're all going to have, like if you change
everyone's different. Everyone's just different. So no one's compatible. That's that's true.
Yes.
But there's compatibility emotionally. There's complementary things that you guys believe in and share. That is compatibility.
Yes. Okay. So far we're kind of on the same page here.
I agree.
So no matter who you're with and who you married, you're going to be incompatible. The truth is, you can get along with anybody that you choose to get along with, and you can choose to love anybody that you choose to love.
Wrong. Overly simplified again.
Overly simplified.
Like there is a truth to the fact that like you can choose to love somebody, right? Like you can, Yeah, you can choose to forgive them, you can choose to love them, but there's also something that we have to understand. Like, if we are trying to love somebody that we don't fundamentally respect, because that person, if you and I are incompatible in the sense of like our values are opposed, right? You're going to constantly do things that are against my values. And that's going to force me to lose respect, or what we call regard, for you. And in that process, that loss of regard, I can convince myself to keep liking you. I can convince myself to keep loving you. But it comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of my own emotional well-being, meaning like, if this continues, yeah, I can choose to love you as long as I repress my own emotional needs, my own thoughts, the fact that I don't have regard for you, I don't have respect for you. Yeah, if I bury those things deep, I can choose to love you.
Yeah, which is that's such a strong statement, right? He's basically saying that you can make any marriage work with anybody.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah, because the reality of this is like, in practice, from a clinical standpoint, what will happen is you can choose to love that person for a time until there's a critical breakdown. And there will be a breakdown, because you can only put your own emotional needs to the side, your own, who you are, your individuality. You can only brush those things off for so long before it takes a toll on your body, your mind, your spirit, everything.
Yeah, but also like there's different types of love, right? Friendship love, intimacy love. Mm-hmm. So he's basically saying you can take any single person, and as long as you do the work, you're going to have that love of intimacy with that person by just doing the work. That is crazy. It's just not true.
And it's part of this big issue of that gets spread, within communities like this, whether it's within Christianity or within a specific church or just any organization, that you can make any relationship work, right? It's the idea that the marriage is everything and should be sacrificed at no cost. Like, there is no cost that is too high to preserve the marriage. Well, there actually are costs that are too high to preserve a marriage. Like, people can be suicidal because of ideologies like this, that nothing else can supersede the marriage, right? So they'll put themselves in a situation where their mental health, their emotional health, their physical health will decline to such a point that they're literally on their deathbed, or they are deciding whether they should kill themselves or whatever it is, just because they can't let go of the idea that a marriage can fail.
And that's counter to what he's saying, because in that example, you have a person that's trying too hard.
Yes.
And they're being overly mature because they're believing in something that probably isn't true for them. And they're just banging their head, and ultimately they're just starting to deteriorate.
And this is what we see more often. Like, if you were to ask us from a clinical standpoint, what do you see typically with people who are getting divorced? What we would say is, what we typically see is two people that are really trying, and or at least one person who's doing everything they possibly can to make it work. And it has nothing to do with effort. It has to do with they're taking a broken engine and running it harder.
And they're pushing more and more and more, and it's just not working.
And that's the dangerous part of this advice, right? Because if we were speaking of this car analogy, nowhere would you take a car, like you take a car to a mechanic and you say, like, I'm hearing some weird sounds from the engine, and it's breaking down, like I can't go past this speed, it won't go above 30 miles an hour. And no mechanic worth his salt or her salt would say, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to turn it on and run it harder. Let's run it at like 80 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, and see what happens. No, the engine is going to completely destroy itself. And that's what this advice does, is it has you under the idea of like, if it's not working, all you got to do is run the engine harder.
Yeah, instead of getting to the roots. And one of the things I love that you said, I think it was in our group, the more intimate it gets, the more your values need to be aligned.
Yes.
And that will show the intimacy of the relationship.
Yeah, it's the opposite of what he's saying. Like, the more expectation you have for connection, the more you do need to be compatible, where exactly. You do need to share similar values.
Exactly.
So again, like
it's very it sounds good, but once again, it's very, very dangerous.
Yes. Okay.
Now, if I were to summarize thousands of hours of marriage counseling
and thousands of wrecked relationships
in 2 words, this is going to save you a lot of money. Here are the 2 words you need to hear that will make your marriage a success. Grow up!
And everybody laughs. Oh, that's so funny. And I've been there. I've been in these audiences. I've heard it, and it is so cringy. This is one of those moments where, Anthony, I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to bleep this. I just want to go, what the fuck? Like, what does that even mean? Grow up. How does that help two people that are actually struggling? Grow up. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, the irony here is his advice is very childish, and the way he's saying it is very childish.
Yeah, it is the most simplistic, most childish way of addressing this issue.
So, okay, grow up. And this is the other thing. So, okay, grow up. So as an adult, what does that mean moving forward? What are the steps that need to be taken as a grown-up to actually make marriages work? With all of your experience, please break it down for us to help us understand.
Yeah.
Where is that?
I don't know. I mean, he goes into it of like, he says it's immaturity and inflexibility. I'll just play it.
Stop being an irritating little immature.
Okay, first of all, Christian pastors, don't plant the word in our head, but then not say it. Like, again, I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to just put it in your head. Like, you did say it. Like, if you,
Sure.
Sorry, this is like me.
It's all good, man. Let it go, man. Let it loose.
I'm not going to say the word. Oh, like, it makes it so much better.
It's immaturity that causes marriage to die. It's not incompatibility. It's inflexibility. I want what I want, and I want it now, and you want what you want, and neither of us are old enough, mature enough, smart enough, spiritual enough to change.
And this is the crux of it, right? That it all comes down to immaturity, wanting it enough, effort, and putting... And this is where it's like, no, there can be some, okay, like if you want to say of the divorces that occur, 10% of them are due to immaturity, people not taking ownership. I mean, ownership is a big issue across the board in divorce and relationship dynamics, right? But again, it's only one of this many problems. But there might be, let's say, of all the people that get divorced, maybe 10% do it because they're just unwilling. They're inflexible. They don't want to put in the effort. I could get behind a number like that. Mm-hmm. But to say that that's the majority, when in reality, from a clinical standpoint, it's not the majority.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's redefining what that means, right? Instead of just the generic term of immaturity, I would say like the 80%, you have to work on yourself and identify the wounds that you have and make sure that you're not identifying that as intimacy in a relationship. Own that and then really work on building a relationship, align core values. Fine, then you're being mature. You're doing everything that you can.
Yeah.
But he's not giving that kind of direction or guidance. He's just saying, grow up and stop being inflexible and just make sacrifices and it'll work out.
But this advice is also what leads people to like grow up, right? That's what you say to somebody when they say, hey, look, like the way that you said that, it really kind of hurt me. And then your partner's like, you just got to grow up, man. That's that advice.
It's very dismissive. It's
dismissive advice of like, dude, that shouldn't matter. That shouldn't bother you. It plays into the unhealthy dynamic that is already happening in these relationships.
But it also takes the assumption, the only way that this advice works is if you have a really good relationship already. And then, yes. Okay, you guys are forgetting things and maybe you're not putting things in perspective. And I don't want the Rolls Royce anymore. And it's just a car. Grow up. You have a car, you have a family. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're going to grow up. We're just going to have perspective.
Yeah.
Then for that audience, it would work. But for everyone else, where you're just trying your best to work things out, it's terrible advice.
Well, and that's the situation where, like, again, better communication tools will actually help you, right? If you have a fundamentally healthy relationship where a few things are, out of whack, this advice can help you maintain perspective.
Sure.
It's communication is better tools. Use more I statements. Use more, talk about the way that you feel. Don't label them and label their emotions and let them speak for themselves. Like those types of communication tools can help when you're dealing with something that's fundamentally healthy. But that's not the majority of people who need clinical advice and support.
Absolutely. And then to his audience, within the audience, the whole advice is just honor God, follow the Bible, play roles, do what you need to do and be mature. But what if it goes beyond that where like you're really not compatible? This doesn't, the
it
values,
leaves no room for that.
The values are not aligned, or like, this doesn't work for me. Then what? Well, you just got to try harder, like you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Just grind harder. You're just going to go into this cycle of depression. It's not going to be a good outcome for you.
No. So, and I don't want to, I'm not angry and going after Rick Warren. This is the example that we're kind of talking about of a bigger problem that's present throughout all of it. It's not even just Christianity or just church. It's like you see these things posted online all the time, and it goes hard. The number one reason for divorce is you just got to try harder, and it's just being more mature, and it's going after all of that because that is the underlying problem. That
you can't pigeonhole everything into like one simple solution.
Yeah.
Life is more complex than that sometimes.
Yeah, it's wild that we look for, we can admit that human beings and our behavior is complex, and yet we want to simplify it down to like a box. Oh, this is the box that you belong in.
Yeah, and life is much more than that.
So anyway, what do you all think? We would love to hear your guys' comments. If you're just listening to the podcast, by the way, you can DM us on Instagram. Let us know your thoughts. If you have questions. If you're watching on YouTube, you guys can comment below. And in the meantime, you might have noticed, by the way, that we've slowed down a little bit in creating content. It's not because the platform's going anywhere. It's actually the opposite. We're working on our self-study program. This is going to be a program where we can actually start bringing in all the people. We have 2,500 people on this wait list and email lists that they're just trying to get into our coaching programs. This will actually allow us to start bringing everybody into the group and create a program that everybody can follow along with, and where we can do group sessions. So
and build a community.
That's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
But if you guys want more info on that, just join the newsletter. You can find that at 12weekrelationships.com. We'll have a link to it in the description of the video as well. You can also find it on our social bios. And that's it for us. So we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Peace.